Hello everybody, welcome to my floss tube. My name is Amy. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today. I'm going to try to film a stitch with me, and specifically I want to show you all how I start a Mirabilia. Like all of the little details, all of the tiny little steps that go into that. I know people often will be like, I could never start a Mirabilia. Like, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. And I've had people ask me specifically too how you actually get started on one. So I just thought I would show how I do that. Like from preparing the fabric, figuring out where to start, getting it in my Q-snap, all of that. All of that said, though, you don't have to do it my way. This is just how I do it. But if you're looking for some tips or tricks or a different way to do it, or you haven't done one before and you want to try one, and you are one of those people feeling overwhelmed and you're not sure how to do a certain part of getting started or centering it on the fabric or whatever, hopefully this will help you. And I'm sure I'm just gonna like ramble on and jibber jabber a whole bunch too. For those of you who have been here before, welcome back. Anybody who's new, checking me out for the first time, welcome. I hope you enjoy. It is fun. I'm actually going to talk about this some today. It is fun seeing, your subscription numbers go up, although that's not why I do this. For those of you who have been watching and I've done the Ophelia giveaway, I'm going to announce the winner of that on my next regular floss tube, because I know some people do not, they may not watch Stitch With Me's. So Ophelia will be given away on my next regular floss tube, which I hope to film, if not this week, next week. So yeah, I think that's all. Let's go ahead and get started. So again, for some of you don't need this information, but of course you're welcome to stay and watch how I do it. But I'm going to go through, like I said, everything I can think of that somebody might have a question about. I'm going to try to get through. This is my stitching spot. I do not have the best setup here for a Stitch With Me. I have my camera on a stand, like precariously balanced over here. So hopefully it won't fall. It was the best I could figure out. I usually do sit and stitch just like this. There's this little ottoman in front of me, which is where my iPad sits and I watch floss tube off of. And I could stretch my legs out there on the ottoman too if I want to. I stitch lots of different ways. Sometimes I use a Q-snap, sometimes I stitch in hand, sometimes I use a scroll frame. If I'm using a scroll frame, I do have a stitching, like a stand for the scroll frame that can sit right here on the floor in front of me, and I can put the stitching right in front of me. And then I stitch two-handed. With a Q-snap, I stitch just poke and stab with one hand. So this bag is from, what's it called? Oh, Hawthorn Supply Company. So they sell quilting fabric, and I'm sorry it's like blowing that out. It says Mama Bear on it. Hawthorn Supply Company is a shop I get a lot of quilting stuff from. I like their stuff. But this is a pre-printed bag panel. So it's actually a really good like beginning sewing project if you're interested in that. They have lots of pre-printed panels that you can buy, and I just put that together. So what I'm going to be starting today is moonflowers, and I need to try to be very careful not to show the chart. This is like really awkward doing for the first time. Hopefully I'll get better at this, because I'd like to do more Stitch With Me's. I like watching other people stitch with me's, and it just feels like stitching with a friend. So if you've watched my other floss tubes, you may have seen me a while back planning on starting this. I had two fabric options. I had originally kitted this up with, this is just Wishel, which I know is not generally people's favorites. I don't mind it so much. It has some extra challenges to it in terms of its, you know, like the openness. So I have to be a little more careful if I use it with carrying threads. So there's that concern. The stiffness doesn't really bother me. Also, I've stitched a lot of I have a lot of Mirabilias that I'm being worked on Wishel. And I've finished a few on Wishels as well. Please pardon me if I'm like a little croaky and sniffly. I am getting over a cold. Anyway, the stiffness doesn't bother me so much. It's not my favorite thing, but it softens up so much. Like the more you just like linen will, like linen clothing, the more you handle it, the more it softens up. So it doesn't bother me so much. But I might stitch it on this eventually. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start it on this fabric. So this is a 28 count casual linen. It's an opalescent. I bought it as just white, and I indigo dyed it. And I know I spoke about that in one of my previous floss tubes, which you may not have seen. So I was leery about starting it on this because indigo is not very light fast, and it does crock, like it rubs off on things. Although I did wash this very well, but it was just fun. Like my kids helped me indigo. I set up an indigo vat this past summer, which I've done before, and we indigo dyed a bunch of stuff, including fabric I'm going to sew with, and some t-shirts, and I decided to throw in cross-stitch fabric, knowing that it might not be the best idea, but I did it anyway. I'm going to start it on this today. I'm going to keep this Wishel in the bag because I think I'm going to live forever, and I'm going to have time to stitch this twice. So, and I think it might look good on that Wishel anyway, and in case the indigo gets going and I decide it's really not going to work out. My needle minder is Clay by Kim needle minder. We went through a huge Clay by Kim phase in the house, although this is actually the newest one. We got some in her last drop. So first thing I need to do, so this is a fat half. So I do stitch my Mirabilias almost always on 28 count. The reason I do that is A, I like it, and I find it comfortable to work on, and B, I don't have a problem with the beads. You know, especially a hand-dyed fabric is going to typically have shrunk up, and so a 32 might actually be more like a 34, and some Mirabilias have a ton of beads like squished into a small space, and the more, sorry about the dinging, the more, if you can hear that from my iPad, the more beads you have in a space, you know, the more likely you're going to have trouble with some of them fitting. So anyway, I go for the 28 count because sometimes by the time it's hand dyed, it is actually like a 30 or even a 32 count. Well, this one didn't shrink too badly. Of course, I didn't put it in a dryer. When I wash my fabrics, I do air dry them. So anyway, I'm going to work on this. Now I need to be kind of stealthy here and not show you the pattern. I'm not sure how that's going to work. But, so I've also talked about I buy more than one pattern. So I have no problem writing on it. This is blowing out really badly. I'm really sorry. But I'm just going to write on the back of the, card because I want, or the envelope, I need to figure out how big I want my fabric to be. And I always do the math myself because there is the occasional error in the pattern. Plus, typically Mirabilias call for a 16 count Aida or a 32 count linen over 2. And so when they tell you the design size, they're talking about on that size linen, and I'm not using that size linen. I'm using 28 count. The stitch count for this is 198 by 240. So this is, I don't know if you can tell what I'm writing. 198 by 240. So what I do, and of course now I don't have my calculator because it's on my phone, so I'll do it in my head. But I'm going to do it on 14 count. And I always do this. I'll write a 14 count so that I can go back later, because sometimes I do this math and I pick out the fabric like 5 years before I actually start the piece. So I'll write this down and I'll label it as 14 count, meaning 14 count Aida or 28 count linen. I'll write down the math and label it like that somewhere so that if I go back to it later, I won't have to redo it. The math, I'll know what I'm talking about. So, you know, doing math on camera is like stressful. And I'm good at math, but now that I'm like, people are watching, it's a little more tense. All right, so to go on to 14 count Eta, I'm going to need 58, just bear with me while I do the math, about 14 inches. This is design size. Make sure I'm in the ballpark. Yeah, cool, I am. By, let's see, 100, and I'm doing it by 17 inches. And I'm doing that, roughly speaking, okay? I didn't do the exact math in my head. So that's the approximate, yeah, that looks right. That's the approximate, like, actual stitched area of the piece. So I like a really big margin. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of which is that I don't serge my fabric. So it can get frayed a little bit around the edges. I've never had a problem with a lot of fraying, but like I might lose certainly a 1/4 inch in a really bad situation, maybe even a 1/2 inch off of a side. So big margins are where it's at for me. I like that. For a smaller piece, I don't care. Like a small that is only gonna, you know, I'm only gonna be stitching for a few weeks or a few months, like off and on. Especially if I'm stitching it in hand, I don't care about having a bigger margin. But I want it to fit comfortably in the Q-snap, so that I'm not like trying to put stitches, like trying to place stitches like up here rubbing against the frame. I want it to fit comfortably in there. I want there to be a little wiggle room in case I've made an error, because accidents do happen. I do sometimes hear people say, like especially certain instructors, I've heard say that it's not that hard. You should do the math and have confidence in your math, that you know what you're doing. While I understand that, accidents happen to everybody, right? Everybody makes mistakes with math from time to time. Even the smartest of us sometimes makes an error. So, especially me, since I just like did that in my head while I was totally stressed out. So I try to account for potentially a few errors here and there. So I like a big margin. People often will say 3 inches on all sides. When I'm stitching a large piece, like a Mirabilia or a Teresa Wentzler or Passione Ricamo, I would say the same thing for like a Bella Filipina or something like that. I actually tend to go for a 4-inch margin on all sides. But I like allow for some wiggle room there, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I'm going to have a 4-inch margin on each side, that means I need to add 8 inches to each measurement here. So if I add 8 inches, then I need to cut my fabric, and I usually write cut, so I know that these are going to be my cut measurements. 22 inches by 25 inches. And then I look at the size of my fabric. So this is a fat half, so it should be 27 by 36. And I want to make the best use of my fabric possible. So again, in case you need to see it again, whoa, there's my math, which I'm just realizing is probably upside down. So here, how's that? There we go. Wait, which way is going to be upside down? Here, okay. Clearly, I've never done this before. I think this is going to be right side up for you guys. So there's my my math, in case you need it or want it. So first thing I need to do is get a piece of fabric that's at least 22 by 25 inches. So because this is a fat half, it should be 27 by 36 inches. I want to use this fabric as wisely as possible. It would be great if I had some left over for smalls. Depending on the size of the Mirabilia, I sometimes have enough from a fat half to cut and get a large Mirabilia and then maybe 2 of the like smaller Nora Corbetts on a fat half. I do almost always buy a fat half of a fabric that I'm interested in for a Mirabilia. I like my big margins, but also since I do the 28 count, most of her, I think most of her Mirabilias will not fit on 28 count, even with 3-inch margins. So I will buy the fat half if there's a fabric I think I'll use for a Mirabilia, knowing that I'll use a big chunk of it for the Mirabilia, and then I can use the offcuts for something else. So I need 22 by 25. Well, this is already 27 inches in its narrower dimension. So instead of cutting it to 25, I'm just going to keep that at 27. I'm not going to cut off 2 inches. I'm not going to end up using that for anything. But what I want to do, so if I have 27 inches up and down, then I need 25 inches, or sorry, excuse me, 22 inches in the other dimension. So I'm 27 up and down. I want 25 left and right. So again, I'm not super precise about this. Another good thing about having a little bit of wiggle room in the larger borders for me. So I keep this little stitch gauge ruler in near my stitchy spot, and I'm just going to use that to measure out 22 inches. So there's 6 inches, 12, 18, and 4. And then I'm going to put just a little snip right there. And I'm going to, before I cut it all the way across, I'm going to double check that I'm at about 22 inches. There's 6, 12, there's that whole measure twice, cut once thing, 18, good. I've got 22 inches. So here's something that I actually learned from a cross-stitch store owner a long time ago. I'm gonna have to put my reading glasses on. And I've found that most people don't know this. So pardon me if you do, but in case you don't, this is how I get a straight cut on my fabric. So I made that small cut through the selvage. That kind of focuses. That really helps. If you cut, if one of your ends you're going to be cutting to or from is on the selvage, it helps to kind of cut all the way through that selvage there. So then I use just my needle to pull up. I apologize for the dinging. My husband is just having a lot of fun texting me this morning, apparently. I pull up just a thread from that cut, and then, so sometimes this goes easier and sometimes it's more difficult. Then I start pulling that thread, and the fabric will start to gather, and I'm really just gently pulling that thread out of the fabric, okay? You don't want to pull too hard like I just did because it will snap. I have enough there to keep going now. Oh, it's shredding on me. All right, we're going to try the thread next to it. They do snap sometimes, and it's not, you can just pull another thread, or you can find that thread where it's snapped further down the fabric and keep going. So you're just gently easing these gathers down the fabric, and what this does is allows you to very easily make a really straight cut across the fabric. Once you have one thread removed, it's very easy to see you have like a channel in the fabric for cutting across, and you don't have to worry about if you're like staying in line and kind of wasting fabric by making an uneven cut. I actually wish more people did this. Last year I had placed an order for hand-dyed fabric, and for a company that I'm not going to call out, but when I got it, this fabric had been cut so wonky. It was supposed to be a fat quarter, but like it was so bad that by the time I was done trimming off like the uneven like zigzag at the top and the bottom, I actually only ended up with like 13 inches of width to be able to use on this fabric. It was very frustrating. So I'm just continuing to pull this thread. Out. You can see it takes a few minutes, but I feel like it saves me time and kind of stress in the long run. Oh. By giving me a nice clear path for cutting my fabric. When you start to get near the end, it'll get really easy to pull that thread out. So the thread's out, and now hopefully this will show up well on camera. Sorry, I'm getting like this blowing out action. I don't know if you can see, there is this really clear path all the way down the fabric for me to cut on. So that's what I'm going to do. I do tend to use sewing scissors for this instead of my embroidery scissors. Just, I want to keep my embroidery scissors for the threads. See, with that thread pulled out, there's just this beautiful gap you can follow. There we go. So this can be used, this is going to be a piece that's about 22, 36 is about 14 by 27. So that's almost a fat quarter of fabric. And you can see pretty easily can be used for like if I cut this here, I might be able to fit like one mirror here and one here. Or sorry, a Nora Corbett, something smaller. So I just set that aside to be used later for something else. I have a sewing machine. I could zigzag that edge, but I won't. I never have. I'm not going to do it. So now I do try to remember that my, what my dimensions were, because this piece is a little bit longer than it is wide, or wider than it is long. So I need to look at, I gotta sneak my pattern out of here. Okay. Oops, sorry for the wobbles. So my pattern is higher, taller than it is wide. So I want to orient the fabric so that it is taller than wide. So it's going to be longer in this direction. Something else that I do, sometimes one side looks different than the other side, and I might choose, to do one side or the other because of that. In this case, that's not the case. What I usually do is, and I don't know if it really makes that much of a difference or not, but I figure because I'm right-handed, the right-hand side of my fabric is more likely to get more wear as I'm like rubbing against it up and down, and I figure that the side closest to my body is likely to get more wear. So if there isn't a reason to do otherwise because of color or the way the fabric works, I usually will put the selvage edge either at the right or against my body, depending on, which way I need it oriented. And I'll usually put, because I'm left here with two edges that are serged, one that's a selvage, and then one that's left raw. I'll put a serged edge against on my right hand side. And I don't know, I'm like looking at the image in the camera, and I don't know, because like everything's reversed the way this is showing. This is my right. I don't know if it's going to look like my right to you guys, but this is my right. So that's where it's going to, that's where I'm going to keep the serged edge. So the next thing I need to do is decide where I'm going to start. Now, I kind of don't care. Now, I'm always going to start counting from the center of my fabric. I always do that. I totally get how, like, if you're stitching a sampler that has, like, a border, you can, like, go in 3 inches and 3 inches there and start. That's fine. Obviously, Mirabilias are not like that. I could still do it that way, counting down from the corner. I don't. I do it from the center. Again, not because I'm not capable of math or because I'm incompetent, but because I just feel like it minimizes the chance of a mistake, right? Because again, in my life, with the world I'm living in, we all make mistakes sometimes. So I always start counting from the middle. Now, I look at the chart to decide where to start, which obviously I can't show you guys the chart. But I was looking at the chart earlier, and I like to start where there's like a decent block of color and someplace where there's going to be like some interesting stuff that I want to stitch. I also tend to like to start on the top half of the chart just because I find it easier. My brain makes more sense in my brain to move from the top half down to the bottom half than trying to count to go up. I find that more awkward. So I prefer to start on the top half, although I don't really care where. And I will count all over this thing to stitch wherever I feel like stitching at any given moment. But like I said, I don't like doing like lots of confetti for the first strand I put in. This is actually kind of going onto the bottom half of the chart. What I think I'm going to do is, I was going to stitch in her hair, but now I'm thinking that might be a little bit harder for you guys to see. So maybe I'm going to go ahead and start at the top. I'm going to count up to the top to get started, the top of the moon, so that hopefully you guys will be, should I do that? You know what? I'm not. That's going to make it a little bit more complicated. I think hopefully you'll be able to see it fine. I'm going to start in our hair in one of the dark brown shades. So the first thing I need to do is an off camera, hopefully. I'm looking at my chart. The color, the symbol I'm starting with is a dark filled in diamond. So it's for 3371. So I need my 3371. This is how I organize things for most of my stitching, including Mirabilias. I have the bead packs in the floss away bags. I have Krynic. This water lily, I've said before I wash my water lilies. I'm actually not going to bother this time. This one is very, very light, especially compared to all the colors around it and the color of the fabric. I'm much more likely to have a problem with this fabric bleeding onto the water lily than I am with the water lily bleeding onto the fabric. So I'm actually not going to bother with that one. And you'll, just to save on floss away bags, as long as the colors are substantially different, I'm going to laugh if I don't have 3371 in here. I'll have to pick something else to start with. Typically, I have everything kitted up. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. As long as the colors are substantially different, I will often put 2 or even 3 skeins in the same floss away bag. I just don't do that if I'm likely to confuse. Like, I'm not going to put 926 right next to 927 or something where I might have trouble distinguishing which one's which. I do buy brand new skeins buy brand new. I will put a partial skein in that I've used on a different project if I'm done with that project and if it looks like there's enough of that color left to complete that project. But I don't use for my master set because I don't want dye lot problems. So I lay all of these out one at a time in numerical order, and then I put them in the floss away bags in numerical order. I am usually a loop starter. So this is how I do it. I don't know if anyone else does it this way. Some of you may know that as you pull, or you may have noticed that as you pull the tail of floss out, you can kind of feel it, you can feel each like loop of it. So as you pull, once a full length up and down is out of the skein, there's like a decline in tension, if that makes sense. Like there's tension as you're pulling it, and you can feel when one full loop up and down is out. I want to pull 6. I know that to get the length of floss I want to stitch with, I need to pull 6 like lengths, like up and down loops of this out. I don't know if that's making any sense to you guys. Please feel free to ask me questions. So this is how I'm going to do it. And it's like I do it by feel, so it's hard for me to show you that in a video. But I go for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And however much floss is in here, it is a multiple of, an even multiple of those 6, if that makes sense. So if I keep pulling them by 6s, I feel like I'm making no sense, guys. I hope it's clear to somebody out there. I can pull, like the last length of thread left in here is still going to be the same length, okay? So I'm going to put what's left of the skein back. I also realized recently that even some long-time veteran stitchers do not know how to get one strand of floss out of here. So I told you guys I was going to go to the basics here. In case you don't know how to do this, you just separate one strand at the end, pinch, hold on to that one strand and pinch there loosely, and you just pull. Some of you may not want to stitch with floss this large, or this long, but that's what I do. So that strand comes out very easily. And now I just wrap what's left around my fingers, and I put it back in the floss away bag with the rest of the floss. And I will tuck that away. Yeah, it was actually a few years ago. My mom was here, and we both pulled our stitching out in the evening, and my mom's stitched off and on for like decades. And I looked over at her, and she was like painstakingly trying to like unravel the floss and complaining about how stupid it was that DNC does it this way, and I don't understand why, and there's got to be a better way. And I was like, Mom, you just pull one strand. She had no idea, and she'd been stitching, like I said, 4 years. So, oh, see, this is what, ooh, I might change my plans. Remember I was talking about crocking? How indigo dye has a tendency to crock or rub off on things. So dye that crocks, that rubs off, it won't necessarily wash out. I don't know why I'm having trouble threading my needle. Crocking dye isn't going to wash out. That rubbing is a whole other, I am a floss licker when I need to be. That crocking dye, it's like a whole other situation. I don't know why I'm having trouble, other than the fact that I grabbed whatever needle was handy, not the usual needle that I use. Every time I'm getting one in. So I'll show you my hands in a minute and show you what I mean by crocking. And if I'm having that much trouble threading the needle, there go my embroidery scissors. I'll let's trim the end and start over. Okay. So, the reason why I said the indigo was a bad idea, aside from not being light fast, was because of dye running, but also it can crock. And I talked about that much more in a previous video. So you guys have seen me handling this fabric here just, I guess, for like a half hour. I can't believe I'm talking for a half hour. Can you see my hands? Can you see that they're turning blue? So the problem with that, and this was my concern, the problem with that is that if the dye is crocking off onto my hands, it's also going to crock off onto my floss. As I stitch with like a lighter colored floss, it will, the floss will turn blue. Also, the dye can crock off of my hands onto the fibers. I'm not going to stitch with this. Even though we just went through all of that, I'm not going to do it. It's just, you know, if I had gone through this process, which is what I was hopeful for, without turning blue, I would be like, we might be okay. We're not going to be okay. I don't want to invest a lot of time into this project only to have it look awful and be ruined. So, luckily, I will probably stitch some smalls on that. That fabric is beautiful and I love it. And I will probably stitch some smalls. We're going to go with a backup Wishel. Backup Wishel to the rescue. This is what I am going to stitch on. And I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the other one, just much faster, where I'm going to trim it. I'm going to do to 22. So I already have 27 inches that way. I'm going to cut 22 off. So I have some extra. There's 6, 12, 18, there's 22. Trim, needle. Usually, because Wishels are so loosely woven, I just said that and I'm going to have a hard time pulling the thread. Usually I have an easier time with Wishels. They are stiff though. It's funny though, like I finished April's Blue Diamond in 2020 or 2021. Well, one of those years. I finished April's Blue Diamond. And that's on a Wishel. And that was the softest stinking fabric. Now, I started it, 10 years or more before I finished it. So that fabric had 10 years of handling. See how easily that thread came out? But by the time I was done, it was so stinking soft. And it kind of made me giggle every time I heard people complain about how stiff Wishel fabrics are. It's like, well, just have a whip that lasts a dozen years and it softens right up. So it really does. Okay. And the Wishel will, because it is a looser weave, the Wishel will fray more at the edges. So I'm definitely happier with my 4-inch margin. Cut a hole in the fabric that I want to use. I still think this is going to be beautiful. I was really hoping my indigo experiment will work, but I would rather bail out of it now than after I've put a lot of work into it and it gets ruined. Okay, so this is a piece, and this is just like a dusty, like gray blue. I don't know what it was called because I threw out the packaging ages ago. Okay, so now I have my Wishel. fabric, then I'm going to stitch it on. So I always count up from the center. So I'm going to fold my fabric in half one way and get a nice center line, and then in half the other way. Okay, so now I'm at this point is the center of the fabric, and I'm going to take my needle that has the floss color, the 3371, that I'm going to use first. I'm going to take that needle and just poke it right through the fabric in the corner that's the center of the fabric, and I'm just going to let my needle hang. I'm going to open it up, and there is a little bit of a selvage on the Wishel fabric. I'm going to keep that towards my body just to like help with wear. I also know, which you guys don't really because you can't see the pattern, but I know that the part of her that I'm starting with, which is going to be up here in her hair, is kind of up and to the right of the center. So when I put this in my Q-snap, I want to make sure that my needle and thread are within the stitchable area of the Q-snap, and that kind of this area up here is within the Q-snap. So I'm going to put this kind of towards the bottom left. All right, so I'm just moving this kind of down. When I use a Q-snap, I usually do the top edge first, and I just keep track as I'm doing this. If you have a hard time keeping track, I know you can stitch like a little arrow there or something. I've never had trouble keeping track. Maybe partly because of the way I do this. The first side I put in, I'm just looking at this the strands of the fabric, the threads of the fabric, to make sure that they look approximately horizontal with the Q-snap underneath it, because I do want my fabric in as straight as I can get it. So I do the top first, and then I move around to the bottom. Now, in order to handle all this like bulk and extra floppy fabric, first I kind of put some tension on this. I could put the Q-snap there, but I actually take the edge of the fabric, the part that won't end up you know, visible when you're actually done and are framing it, and I double it up. I wrap that over it. That also, I mean, you can use a piece of you know, flannel or batting to do this too. I just find that using the fabric itself to do that, it helps protect the stitches a little bit, but then it also helps handle my bulk, so I don't have so much hanging down there. And then I do the sides, and I do the same thing where I fold it down, and then I take the raw edge of the fabric and fold it over. And my pattern's like edging over, like it just wants to be seen. And do the same thing. Sometimes you don't have, if you're stitching towards the edge of the pattern, you won't have enough to fold over there on the edge. But if I have enough, I do it. And to tighten, you can just, you know, pull that. And then I go back to my first edge, which I know is my top, and I'm going to, this helps make the Q-snap a little bit tighter too. I'm going to fold in that there a little bit too. So I don't have a hard time remembering like which way is up, because I know that I put my needle in my bottom left corner because I need to count up to like this area in order to start her face. So this is gonna be very boring because I'm counting off camera, but all I'm doing, so there's center marks on the pattern, all I'm doing is counting up and over to, since I typically stitch like top down, I don't necessarily stitch the whole pattern top down, but like within a block of color, I will stitch it from the top down more often than not. So what I'm going to do is count on the pattern where the centering arrows come together and show you the center of the pattern. I'm going to count how many stitches up and how many stitches over I need to go to get from the center of the pattern, which is like right there, I'm going to go up and over to the first symbol that shows up of 3371 that I'm stitching. So I need to go up, and I use those 10s to do that. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 65, and over 10, 20, 30, 46. So I need to go up about 65 and up 40 and over 46. Now, again, I have those pretty big margins, so I'm not really stressed out about this. I'm not real worried about messing it up, which is good, because normally I'm not trying to talk while remembering those numbers. I feel like I'm going to forget the numbers. I can always recount if I want to, though. So I take my needle around to the back, because that's how I'm most comfortable, and I kind of stick it up. I have my needle kind of sticking up there into what would be approximately my center hole, and I'm just going to count over 2 fabric, counting 2 fabric threads as a single number. I'm going to count up 65 and over 56. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 9, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 6, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65. So I'm up to 65. I've got it up there. You can see my needle. And now I'm going to go over 46. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46. Okay, and then I pull my needle up just enough so that it's fully through, because now I know that's the needle's not going to accidentally fall out back through the hole, which I've had happen to me. So I don't usually recount this. Normally when I'm counting from one area to another in a piece, I totally will recount. I don't typically recount this unless I have some reason, unless I was like having a lot of trouble and I have some reason to think I might be really off. And that didn't happen in this case. I don't feel like I need to recount, in part because I know I have a lot of wiggle room. I know I have those 4-inch margins. Also, what I do is kind of look at this. Now, okay, so I'm like a chemist by training, so I love math. Just looking at this, that looks like about the relative length of this to this. Yeah, that's like 65 by 46, right? This is a bit shorter than this. It looks like, yeah, about 2/3 of that. That's, that fraction looks about right to me. So I'm okay. And so once I've done that and I know where my starting stitch is, I can pull this thread out from the center mark, because I don't need that center marking anymore, because I know this is where I'm going to put my first stitch. So something else I wanted to talk about, because also blew my mind recently, that this is information that isn't as universal as I thought it might be. Excuse me while I get a sip. Also, like, I'm looking at my counter. Apparently I'm at 49 minutes right now. Just so you know, it does not take 49 minutes to start a Mirabilia. It really only takes that long if you're also talking about it. Okay, so don't let that intimidate you, if you're one of those people who have never done it. Okay, I'm actually going to use this fabric so I can get a little bit closer. So if you look at your fabric, I don't think I'm going to be able to show it. I don't know that I'm going to be able to show it as well as I want to. If you look at your fabric, at any cross-stitch fabric, you'll see that there's Some threads go over unders and over unders. Some threads go over others, and some threads are going under others. I was taught to start, I need a piece of paper. I can show you with a piece of paper. So, let's see if I can show you. Okay. Hopefully this is what is going to be like up here when I publish this. Oh, I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay. So if you're looking at your fabric threads, like they're this tic-tac-toe board here. I'm going to put an X in it. Okay, so there's your cross stitch. If I'm looking at that join that I've circled there, and I do come up here, down there, up here, and down there. I was taught that in order to support your stitch properly, the vertical thread here needs to be on top of the horizontal thread. That is what is going to support your stitches the best. Now, I was taught that 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, and again, it seemed clear to me at the time that that was like commonly understood. It's just the way you do things. You make sure that this vertical thread is on top of the horizontal thread when you start your stitch. Recently, it's come to my attention that most people have no idea, or I shouldn't say most people. The few people it's come up with have no idea what I'm talking about. And I also, honestly, I don't know if there's any scientific validity to that. I don't know the history of that belief. I don't know if it's actually true. I don't know if that is, as it was presented to me, it was like every schoolgirl for hundreds of years has known you start on the vertical thread like that. I don't know. I don't know if that was even true at the time. No idea. But I always start on the vertical thread. And it, in some ways, actually makes it easy, especially if I'm doing something like a Teresa Wensler or something that has lots of fractionals. It makes it very obvious when you've gotten off somewhere. If you know that your X's should always have the vertical threads on top in certain locations, then if you go to put a stitch somewhere and it's not, then you know something's wrong. And I've definitely done that before. I've caught myself being like a half stitch off somewhere. So I do find it helpful for that reason. Okay, moving on. So I've got my thread coming up in the bottom left because I'd go bottom left to top right to bottom right to top left. So I've got my thread coming up in the bottom left of where I want my stitch to be. So then I just count over 2, and I have the tail hanging in the back. I just count the over 2 and up 2 to go down. And then I flip it over, pull it most of the way through, and I actually want to shorten my working threads, so I'm going to pull that tail. And then when I have just the loop, this should be closer, sorry guys. So when I have just that loop hanging, I just put my needle through that loop and pull it snug. Flip it back over, and now I can start stitching. That's it. And my first row has 4 stitches in it. So I was initially a poker and stabber, and it's still, I have to say, although it's not the fastest way to stitch, it's often like my most comfortable way to stitch, is just sitting here with a Q-snap, poking and stabbing. So I get to the end of the row and come back. And when I'm starting a Mirabilia, what I will try to do on my first stitching session is get enough in that I think it'll be kind of clearly recognizable the next time I pick it up where I was stitching. Because, let's face it, it might be 3 years between like picking up a piece. It could be more than that. It could be 8 years. It could be a dozen years. I mean, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? So that's basically it. That's how I start a Mirabilia. Again, I promise, especially when you've done it a few times, it does not take nearly an hour to start a Mirabilia. I hope that helped some of you, or maybe was at least mildly entertaining for those of you who didn't need any of that information. I'd love to know, if you guys want to comment, I would love to know if you guys know about that whole like starting over a vertical thread rule, if you have any idea what I'm talking about. I'd love to know if some of you guys do that, like pulling a thread to cut your fabric thing. You know, I don't have any like real life stitching friends. I haven't even been particularly close to a really good stitching store in a very long time. And so I'm kind of stitching in isolation these days to a certain extent. I mean, social media, of course, is changing that. But, you know, in terms of like real life stitchy friends, you know, or in person, I should say, in person stitchy friends, I don't really have. So I don't see other people stitch. I don't know if people do it that way. Some of you might be noticing too, I do not railroad all my stitches, but I am in the habit of using my needle as a laying tool. If I do like my threads to lay nicely next to each other, my stitches are certainly not perfect. I think like most people, I have like a threshold for what I'm willing to let slide, I guess I would say. But if my threads are not laying next to each other kind of nicely, I will use my needle to like make them lay nicely. It just takes like a fraction of a second to do. But also I think like most stitchers, I've learned ways of moving my needle that helps maximize the likelihood that they're going to lay nicely side by side. So I'm just going to yammer on for a little bit. I was going to say if you guys don't mind, but if you do mind, you can just turn me off. I'm just going to yammer on for a little bit while I stitch. If you guys want to, I hope you've been stitching. I really hope all of you have been like, have a drink, not, you know, not necessarily alcoholic drink, but just a drink, and you're just chilling and stitching and enjoying yourselves while you watch me do this. But yeah, I just thought I'd yammer on about some floss tube topics here for a little bit. There seems to be, I don't know if there's an actual consensus, but there's at least a vocal group of my viewers who like longer videos. So, you know, I'm just sitting here stitching. May as well record me stitching and yammering on. But I've been thinking about floss tube a lot lately, and I kind of wanted to talk about a few things, and I'm curious what y'all will think about what I have to say. So please feel free to comment and let me know kind of where you stand. So I'm very curious. But I've seen a bit of discussion kind of recently about floss tube, and like, you know, Lindy Stitches did a thing here recently where I guess she kind of took an informal survey. She wanted to know for people who had stopped doing floss tube, why that was. And there were a lot of reasons, including like the time it takes to do them, the shopping, kind of like unhealthy habits, I think she called it, of, you know, spending too much money, basically, feeling like you're trying to, like a keeping up with the Joneses thing, spending too much money because of all the floss tube, or feeling like you have to have haul to show, I guess, on your videos. And, you know, it made me, and it's come up with a couple of other floss tubers in their videos as well, and it made me want to kind of talk a little bit more about why I started doing floss tube, why I, at least so far, I'm continuing to do floss tube. and just my thoughts about floss tube in general. So I started filming floss tubes last summer. So I think summer of 2021. I'd been thinking about it for a very long time, probably a year prior to that. My family was like really wanting me to do it. I've been thinking about it for a while. I didn't want to do it unless I knew why I was doing it, if that makes sense. I wanted to have a good reason for doing it before I jumped in. And so before the spring before I started doing it, I also was noticing some not so great things about my floss tube viewing habits. I do occasionally just like let my thread drop if I notice it's twisting a lot, so it can untwist. I was noticing that some floss tubers, watching certain floss tubers, would have a relatively positive impact on my mood and how I was feeling. And watching other floss tubers was having a decidedly negative impact on how I was feeling. I fully admit I was like actively hate watching certain floss tubers at one point. And I don't actually mean that as a criticism of the floss tubers. If anything, I mean that more as a criticism of myself. For me, it was important to kind of come to the realization that, you know, there's a lot of talk. A lot of people will mention what a great community this is and how supportive. And I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that everyone is going to be everyone else's cup of tea, right? And the same goes for me. I'm not in love with all floss tubes or all floss tubers. There were certain floss tubers I would watch, and that shopping bug, I totally understood that. I was finding myself driven to want to buy things that I would never actually stitch. They're just not me. And, you know, it was taking a good bit of effort to, like, keep reminding myself, like, that's not for me. It's just going to sit on a shelf. I don't actually ever want to stitch that. I don't need to collect it. Let that other person stitch it and have it look beautiful. You know, you leave it alone. You know, some people, I was really, really actively trying to seek out anybody who was stitching in Mirabilia, because obviously that's my favorite thing to stitch, or I think obviously that's my favorite thing to stitch. I have a little knot, usually easy to pull out. Typically my favorite thing to stitch, kind of desperate to find other people whose projects I can ogle. I don't have a local needlework shop where I can go look at models and things. And it's just inspiring, right? It like fires that passion in you to see other people stitching things you love to stitch. And I found myself in a situation where there were floss tubers stitching maybe like one Mirabilia. So I was watching every floss tube, hoping to catch a glimpse of that Mirabilia. And eventually, one floss tuber in particular mentioned, like, well, I'm not going to, yeah, I work on it, but I'm not going to show it because nobody wants to see that. And, you know, meanwhile, I'm in my home screaming, like, what? No, show your Mirabilia. That's the only thing I want to see. And, you know, the floss tuber said, like, I do all these smalls because that's the content people want. They want to see a finish every week. They want to see things getting done. And that really made me stop and think about my viewing habits hard. And I really came to the conclusion that I need, that if I'm going to watch a floss tube, it needs to not just be desperately wishing for a glimpse of a Mirabilia. That watching a floss tube needs to it needs to somehow enhance my well-being by the time that floss tube is over. And different floss tubes, like different floss tubers videos, scratch that itch for me in a different way. There are some floss tubers that I love to watch who do not stitch at all the things that I stitch. Not even close. But I find their floss tubes either like relaxing, like I feel like I've sat and listened to a friend just have a chat and share their passion for a hobby that I also love. And there are other floss tubers that are showing lots of Mirabilias and or big projects, and so I feel really inspired, you know, after watching their videos. I decided I needed to be at the end of a floss tube. I needed to have some benefit from it. That benefit could be inspiration. It could be just a feeling of calmness. It could be a feeling of camaraderie, of, you know, spending a little time catching up with somebody who I've come to enjoy, you know, their videos. But there needs to be a positive effect there at the end. So I went through and actually unsubscribed from a whole bunch of floss tubers. Some of them I unsubscribed not because they were having a bad effect on me or a negative effect, but because there just was no effect, kind of. Like, it was just dead air, and I was left feeling like, you know, if it's not actually a benefit, I don't know that I need to be spending my time. That's kind of like dead air, too. Like, maybe I could put in an audiobook or something instead. I also love to read. So I unsubscribed from a bunch of floss tubers. And again, no, that's not, I don't mean that in an like offensive way at all, or even a critical way. There were just floss tubers that were not my cup of tea. I know a lot of those floss tubers are definitively some other people's cup of tea, right? There's some really popular floss tubers that just aren't for me, and that's okay. I just decided for me, in order for floss tube to continue to be a healthy thing and not an example of social media doing harm, that I needed to have, you know, a net benefit from watching a particular floss tuber's videos. But that also very helpfully kind of led me to being really clear about why I wanted to film my floss tube, because I was thinking about the reasons why I sometimes didn't like some other people's floss tubes, or why some other people's floss tubes were not, you know, for me. And I don't mean this as a criticism. I just mean this as, you know, just not my cup of tea. I knew if I wanted to do a floss tube that I didn't want it to be, I didn't want to be driven by getting new subscribers. If I was going to do a floss tube, which obviously I ended up doing, the purpose for me needed to be simply a driving desire and wish to share what I'm doing. The floss tubers that I enjoy the most are those for whom, when they do an update, I feel like they're just sitting down and just talking to me. Like, they're just normal people, which obviously they are, but normal people just chatting about their stitching and being like, hey, this is what I've been doing with my time. What have you been doing with your time? I really love that. Something that I don't enjoy so much is kind of feeling like people have turned their floss tube into a business, if that makes sense. I do not mind when people monetize their floss tubes. That doesn't bother me a bit. A large part of me is like, yeah, you know what? If you can monetize it, go for it, because those commercials are going to run. whether you're monetized or not, YouTube's making a ton of money off of you. Well, you know, making money off of you. You should get a cut of that. So that doesn't bother me at all. But some floss tubes that I watch, I definitely do. I am left with a feeling that that person is like marketing more than like marketing for other companies more than anything else. And I don't like watching that. Now, the exception is designers. I love watching designers' floss tubes, especially like Heartstring Samplery and Lindy Stitches. Beth Twist at Heartstring Samplery and Stephanie Webb at Lindy Stitches. I love watching their floss tubes. Partly because I definitely get that feeling that they're just like sitting down to like share with the world what they stitched that day. And that's what I love the most about flosstube. But also, I feel like they both educate me a lot about the designing process and like the business of being a designer. I have zero desire to become a designer myself, because I would want to design Mirabilias and I'm simply not capable, or like Mirabilia-esque type things. But I like knowing about it. I'm one of those people who I like knowing like all of the nitty gritty about something. When I have a hobby, I like learning as much about it as possible. Their stitching is beautiful. Their designs are beautiful. They're not all my cup of tea, but that's fine. I enjoy their floss tubes immeasurably. And it doesn't, like, they're designers. So if they're going on there and they're like showing their new designs and stuff, that doesn't bother me at all. But you know, people who aren't designers, I don't know, sometimes I just get a sense that like, it feels like they're making, I guess here's what it is. It feels like they're making decisions based on what's going to get them the most views and the most subscribers. And I'm not saying anything is wrong with that. I'm just saying that's not my purpose. I think it's totally fine if that is somebody's purpose. But I tended to not enjoy those floss tubes as much. Those types of floss tubes tended to leave me, have a more negative effect on me, which may be my own personal feeling, but they still did. And so I felt like I needed to quit those floss tubes. And when it came time to make my own floss tube, I was very clear in my own mind that I didn't want it to influence what I was stitching. Now, I think to a certain extent, you know, it's impossible to have it not influence you at all, right? If you film a video and people are like, oh yeah, we can't wait to see you finish such and such, it might motivate you to finish a certain piece. I would argue that that's a positive, you know, influence. I would hate to stop stitching Mirabilias because I think in order to have a floss tube audience that I need to be stitching smalls so I have a finish every week. Like, that just wouldn't be me, right? I love huge designs. And while some people certainly may not want to watch floss tubes like this, where it's like a huge design and, you know, somebody might go a year without a finish, that's cool. If I'm not somebody's cup of tea, don't watch me. Like, no hard feelings. You move on to what you are going to enjoy. But I don't mind watching floss tubes where people never get a finish. I am perfectly happy to watch somebody show the same piece every week with like 100 stitches added. If it's like a Mirabilia, or even, I'm not really a Hade stitcher so much myself, but I like watching other people do them. I'm happy. I'm happy to watch that. If somebody just has a nice personality that I find comforting or soothing, I'm happy to watch that. So I was really clear in my own mind that it needed to not change, that filming floss tubes needed to not change what I wanted to stitch or what I was stitching. And that needs to be kind of like a warning sign to me if I am noticing that I'm making my decisions differently, then I'm going to need to, you know, reevaluate. But so far, it's not a problem. And I think there's got to be an audience out there like me, you know, which is why I wanted to do this. I was scouring flosstube for Mirabilia stitchers and not finding a whole lot. But there's a lot of Mirabilia stitchers out there with huge followings. So I'm thinking there's got to be people out there that, like me, who want to see these kinds of designs being stitched. I love watching Sarah the Stitching Mommy, Belinda the Aussie Stitcher, you know, people who, Crossed by Floss, Lisa at Crossed by Floss. There's some others that haven't filmed much here in the last year or two that I was watching early on. But I love watching their progress on these huge projects. It doesn't bother me a bit if they don't get a finish. So yeah, you know, watching your subscription numbers go up is fun. But I don't ever want it to be what motivates me to stitch certain things and not others. I don't want it to change my stitching habits. I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. I know it may not be everybody's cup of tea, and that's fine. But I think some of you seem to enjoy watching me. I don't know how this stitch with me will go. If you'll enjoy this or not, but hopefully you will. Because honestly, like, this is, if I could have you guys, like, in my home, like, sitting, like, it would be so great if this was just, like, a stitch night. And, like, this is what I would be doing if you were in my home. We could just sit here and stitch and, you know, talk with each other instead of me just monologuing it for over an hour. This is kind of what I would be doing with my day anyway. My kids are at school today. They've been home a lot lately, so I haven't had much stitching time lately. I'm in Pittsburgh. I'm in the Pittsburgh area. So we had a lot of snow. We had a bridge collapse. My kids had there was 1 week, so a couple of weeks ago, they had a snow day, and they had, I think, 2 late starts that week. And then last week, I think they had like a late start, and then they also had 2 home instruction days. So they had to do school from home, which I find very stressful. My kids are young enough that they're not super independent, and they can be very emotional and need a lot of kind of reassurance. So those home instruction days I find difficult. So I feel like I haven't had tons of stitching time lately. But I have gotten a little bit of time in on Princess and the Dragon, which I'm very happy about. But I can show you all everything I have been doing in my next floss tube. It feels good to start Moonflowers. I have no idea how much I will work on her in coming weeks. I just wanted to get her started. And I can tell you right now, like, I'm working on this because it's still blue fabric and a really dark floss. My hands are still blue. There's no way I am coming within, 10 feet of a Teresa Wensler until all this blue is off my hands. But I know from experience it's not going to wash off. Like, it might help a little bit, but I really just need for it to wear off, which it probably will by tomorrow. So I might do some hand sewing and quilting later today. Stuff where I'm not as concerned about the dye on my fingers. I've noticed too, a lot of people, so there seems to be like an explosion in dyers recently, which I've talked about. The dyers that I've mentioned in previous floss tubes, I love. They're phenomenal. There's also been an explosion in people experimenting, it seems, at home with dyeing, which I think is great. Before I ever dyed cross-stitch fabric, I dyed roving and yarn for knitting, and dyed quite a bit of it. I've taken classes on it, learned the difference between dyeing different types of fibers, because you have to use different chemicals depending on your substrate and what you're dyeing. That's probably like the chemistry nerd in me. I just love learning about all the little nitty-gritty details of that. It's cool to see people doing their own home dyeing. I guess it also makes me a little bit nervous too. I just want to make sure that, you know, I want to make sure that when I buy hand-dyed fabric, that it is like higher quality. You know, a lot of us, myself included, use RIT dye to dye fabric at home, but that's not really the best dye to be using. If that makes sense. You know, if you were doing it professionally, I would certainly want to be doing something other than RIT. Using like Jacquard, you know, Procyon dyes or something. Prepping, knowing how to prep the fabric properly, set the dye properly. Because I have noticed with some companies that does seem to be a problem. Like I can tell sometimes with the product that I get that maybe they haven't done that properly. I'm using my big scissors to trim my thread just because I dropped my embroidery scissors. I don't normally do that. Yeah, I don't know. Dyeing with a lot of people. I guess what I'm saying is I wish more dyeing companies put on their websites generally how they dye. And I don't mean like trade secret process to get certain modeling effects or whatnot. I just mean like what brand dyes they're using, and if it's a multi-step process, which with plant fiber like linen kind of should be a multi-step process if they're gonna prep the fabric properly to set the dye. I wish more of them were more transparent about that, because I know a lot of them also will say that, you know, don't wash my fabric, and in my opinion is that they're saying that largely to cover their butts because most of the fabric can be washed just fine. But I want to know the difference between when one can be washed just fine, because I do pre-wash the fabric, versus when no, actually the process they're using, you cannot wash this fabric, don't do it. And if they were a little more transparent about what process they were using, then I'd be able to tell. I'm trying to decide what color. I'm gonna hang in here a little bit longer. I might start one more color. I'm going to grab some 917, which I believe is like bright, like fuchsia pink, because that's for, I'm gonna start this flower in her hair right there. Probably won't stay on too much longer. But I do like, I've mentioned I like stopping when I already have a strand on the needle. Okay, so you see my 6, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know, you might even be able to see that tension kind of lapsing a little bit as I do that. Back in the floss away bag. I feel like this is a totally awkward setup. I hope this looks okay. Like, it works great for stitching. I don't know how great this works for filming me stitching. That's okay. You might be able to hear my dog giving herself a bath too. My dog is like up behind me on the chair, because this is what we do when we do have a day that my children are at school, which it's, I mean, nowadays is most of the time. I'm still recovering from pandemic homeschooling. I make sure to give myself permission to sit on my butt and stitch or sew or whatever I want to do. My sort of policy is I have until noon. Like between 9 a.m. and noon is simply for me. I'm gonna have to get a different needle the next time I pick this up. This needle is awful. I will stitch with anything that I have around, but I do like what are they? Oh, somebody's favorite needles. Patsy's something favorite needles or something. I'm sure I'm butchering that. Some of you know what I'm talking about though. I usually stitch with a size 26. I'll stitch with anything though, as long as it's not like deforming the fabric. So to start this new color, I'm just gonna find a recognizable spot. Am I stitching? I'm trying to hold this. So this is, you know, part of her hair. I'm gonna count over and up from there to get to where I need to go. Bear with me while I do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3. And that is something I will often recount. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3. Okay. I usually count twice. Count it on the pattern twice and count it on the fabric twice. And as long as those numbers match up and confirm each other, then I'm fine. If there's a discrepancy, I will keep counting until I am sure I have resolved it and I'm good to go. So yeah, for my own well-being, I try to make the mornings. So I'm usually home from dropping my kids at school by around 9 o'clock. And I do sub. I'm a substitute teacher, but I don't sub much by choice. And I usually only like to go in the afternoons. There's exceptions to that. But some weeks I don't sub at all, especially like here in recent weeks, and I've been sick a whole lot. And there's some weeks where I sub, nearly every day, although that's pretty rare. But especially if there's some of those exceptions, like I'll go in for my kids' teachers whole day and stuff. I want to spend some more time with my kids. But yeah, so I could very easily, spend the entire day doing laundry, cleaning, dusting, and never sit down and take time for myself. And at least in this household, and I suspect in many of your households, especially if you have young kids around, it's very difficult to carve out chunks of alone time or me time when they're also running around and needing and wanting things. So I decided, you know what, I can do laundry, not all of it, but a lot of that laundry and whatnot, I can do that when they're home. I can do that on Saturdays and Sundays. What I can't do on Saturdays and Sundays is sit down by myself and listen to an audiobook. It won't happen because I'm up and down frequently helping people with things. People want to play games with me, which is awesome. I don't always say yes, but I also don't always want to say no. It's fun playing games with my kids. I'm happy that they want to do those things with me. So yeah, for me, it works best to make use of the time that I know I'm going to be alone as self-care time. So 9 to noon, as much as possible, I try to make just for me. Often we'll exercise during that time, because I do love exercising too. My Fiber Arts Amy Instagram account does not show my exercise. I have another Instagram account for that. I do acrobatics, and I was training a lot before the pandemic, but I still at home, I love doing yoga, and we have trampoline I love flipping around on. So I do a lot of those things in the mornings while the kids are at school, and that I feel like that allows me to focus more once they're home from school on taking care of them and being there for them in all the ways that they need without, without that like internal fight of trying to carve out time for myself. Because I did carve out the time for myself. I had it in the morning while everyone was at school. I feel like I'm like talking to my therapist now or something. I'm going to clean up here in a second, and I'll show you how I do that. So if I'm working on a piece, scroll rods, I keep things on long term. I don't take pieces on and off of those, but I will loosen the tension if I'm not stitching on it for a while. If there's a piece that I'm going to be stitching mostly in a Q-snap, I keep the needle minder on the fabric, and I just put the needle there. And look at how great this looks so far. Oh, it's just so pretty. It's going to be so gorgeous. Oh, that bright, like fuchsia. Look at the Wishel fabric. Like you can see the pattern or the, cover photo through the Wishel. That's so funny. It'll look great when it's done though. But I don't know when I'm going to come back to this. I'm not going to stitch it anymore today, and I might not stitch it anymore for a month. I just don't know. So I'm going to take it off of the Q-snap. And I keep everything together in its bag. I do like having, let me take my glasses off. I do like having a bag for everything. Now, I don't have a separate Q-snap for every bag. I do have probably a dozen of these in like every size. Although the 11 by 11 is by far what I use the most. I do have 11 by 17 and a kit to turn it into a 17 by 17, which sometimes can be helpful for beading. I do that. But I don't typically, unless I'm going to be traveling with it, I don't keep the Q-snap in with everything. So I just gently will fold this. Gently, gently, gently. Try not to get any hard crease lines. Everything's going to go back in this one bag. I'm going to try to not show you the pattern. And that'll go back in. I mentioned before there's that idea that I find credible that plastic can change the colors of the dye in a hand-dyed fabric. This isn't a hand-dyed fabric, so it doesn't matter. But even so, just by habit, I put the floss away bags against the pattern. So it's stacked. I realize there's acid in the pattern, but it's stacked with the fabric and then pattern and then floss away bags so that the bags aren't next to it. Can you see the blue on my skin? I don't know how well it's showing up in the camera. It is like so obvious here. My thumb, you can kind of see that really well. There's like so much blue. Well, that's kind of disappointing, but I'm sure I will find plenty of like Halloween smalls. I think will look great on that indigo fabric. There's so many like Halloween smalls that I wanted. Like I'm not usually a huge smalls person, but Halloween gets me like every time. So I'll find a use for it, but I do wish it had worked out for this big one. So that's it, guys. I have no idea if anything I said or did made any sense. feel free to let me know in the comments. If you want me to do this again, either just a normal stitch with me, or if you want me to go over things again, how I start things, or if you want me to show you starting other types of projects, like a Teresa Wensler or whatever, let me know, because obviously I don't mind starting things. Or if there's other things you want me to show, like washing a piece, or I guess like how I do dyeing, or I don't know, whatever. If there's something else you want me to show, let me know. And I'll definitely give it a shot. But thanks, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. I can't believe I just like talked for an hour and a half. So again, I'm Fiber Arts Amy here on Instagram if you want to check me out, but no pressure, because as I talked about, I just really want people who love the things that I love and who get something out of watching my videos to find me. I want the people who watch me to somehow feel better for having watched me. I want you to learn something, or feel inspired, or just feel like you just got like some awesome fun friend time and like distraction hanging out with a friend for a while you stitched. You know, just something good. If you're watching me getting angry or annoyed, turn me off. Don't watch me. I'm not having a good effect on you. Go away. Go find somebody who won't have a bad effect on you. I just feel like flosstube has the power to be like such an amazing community, and I think we all owe it to ourselves to make sure that we're getting something out of the people that we're watching, and that it's okay to not watch everyone. It's okay, even if it's a really popular flosstuber. If that person makes you feel stressed out, then don't watch them. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So anyway, on that note, thanks guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. Let me know what you think. And let me know if there were parts of that stuff that I went through that you hadn't heard before. Let me know. Hopefully I will see you guys again soon, and the next flosstube I film, which again will be later this week or next week, should be, fingers crossed, I will announce the winner of the Ophelia chart. Thanks guys. Bye.